Greetings and a very warm welcome to this Business Day dialogue in association with Accenture in Africa. My name's Jeremy Maggs, and in the next 60 minutes or so, how we need to rethink the concept of leadership in South Africa. Here's the background. The genesis of the session was seeded by Accenture's Chief Executive Officer, Vukani Mngxati, one of our panel members today. He believes passionately in empathetic, wise, and strategic leadership, with, I think, a renewed focus on identifying and creating the right aptitudes and proficiencies. This, he believes, is going to give the country the urgent slingshot it needs towards a new trajectory of sustained growth and success. Let me tell you, it's a big and audacious debate, and it's starting right here and right now. Along with Vukani, I've also got Professor Mamokgethi Phakeng, who is the Vice-Chancellor at the University of Cape Town, Martin Kingston, Chairman of the Steering Committee, Business for South Africa, and Dr. Leila Fourie, Group Chief Executive of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. In what I know is going to be an interrogative and needle-moving debate, I'm going to ask if there are new ways to lead, how we can reframe the leadership debate, and are we adept enough at leading in a crisis? How we can engender possibly a more cooperative alliance or alliances, and probably most critically, how can more people be trained and given a seat at the leadership table? Vukani, to you first of all, and a very warm welcome. I'm interested to know why you're raising this issue of leadership at this point, and you're obviously concerned, so where are the deficits?
Firstly, thanks, Jeremy. Thank you for hosting us. And I wanted just to also thank our panelists, Leila, Mamokgethi, and Martin. The reason why I thought it's important for us to examine the leadership issue in our country, Martin, is that I just took an opportunity to step back a little bit. Right now, 34% of our people are unemployed. If you expand that and add the definition of discouraged workers, 44%, almost half of people in our country who are looking for work actually find themselves unemployed. So that on its own creates a significant issue for us. And we've got to think about it carefully, because what this does when we have so many of our people in our country unemployed, you create a ticking time bomb. Just have a look at what happened over a month ago in KZN and Gauteng. As much as there was a significant element of thuggery and violence in that, but you cannot help but think how much of this unemployment crisis contributed to that particular issue.
And was that a failure of leadership?
I absolutely believe that it's a failure of leadership. Why? Why do we allow so many of our people to languish? Now, the second point that I want to put on the table here is, if you think about how many of our people are actually in our social security services in the country, we have probably 19 million people benefiting from the social security services. This on its own is a good thing, because we're creating a security basket for our people. However, if we cannot create a mechanism to off-ramp these folks out of the security basket into employment, into gainful employment, into participating meaningfully in the economy of the country, we create a significant problem. Because the analogy I use is, you have this huge highway with only on-ramps. You never off-ramp people. So very soon, we're creating a scenario where this country is not going to be able to afford, the people that you are putting into the security basket. Right now, for instance, we have what? We're spending 200 billion rands, and this increases 10% every year in a scenario where our GDP is declining year on year. So, and I think if you take all these ills, you put COVID in place, you look at how unskilled our people are, it requires us to step back and say, how do we lead differently? What do we as a nation do to actually take on a different thinking from a leadership standpoint? How do we solve these ills?
So we'll look at that new type of understanding whom we lead. And also it's about cooperation. And that's what I want to put to Martin Kingston now. Martin, welcome to you again. Maybe you can reflect for us in your opening remarks on this increasingly important concept of meaningful partnership, and in South Africa's case, particularly between business and government. Let's start there, then we can move on to some of the other avenues that our guests have raised.
Yeah, well, thank you, Jeremy, and good morning. A lot of the points have already been raised, but perhaps the starting point is what both Vukani and Leila talked about, which was the fact that what COVID-19 has done is that it's magnified all of the fissures and challenges as a society that we have had since long before 1994, but in truth haven't really addressed. Let's call it societal deficits, the issues of poverty, unemployment, and inequality, some of which we have already touched upon. And we had already started working in many structures as business, organized, and indeed more broadly with government and other social partners, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. But when it was clear that the pandemic was going to reach our shores in March of last year, we decided to pivot into a relationship where we could provide the requisite support, not really to government, but to the nation as business, in ensuring that we could combat the challenge of the pandemic and indeed its manifestations in a number of different ways. So we formed Business for South Africa, a virtual platform, 450 or so people at its peak, all working pro bono, and none of them bringing their egos or their brands into the virtual calls that we had. 90% of us have actually never physically met with one another in our lives or subsequent to March of last year. And we had competitors working side by side to ensure that we could put the very best of business, and the very best of business doesn't mean big business, it means people with the requisite skills and capabilities to try and support a national endeavor on three fronts then. One, of course, was bringing PPE into the country. It seems a long time ago now, but if we cast our mind back in March of last year, there was no PPE in the country, not even masks. The second was making sure that we could provide support to those that were rendered unemployed on a temporary basis. Since then, some 60 billion rand has been dispersed to over 6 million people. And the third was, on the one hand, to work with government on ensuring that we could manage different levels of lockdown, and on the other hand, in discussion with government and the president, to formulate a reconstruction and recovery plan for the country in a post-COVID environment, recognizing that what had preceded was not going to apply going forwards. And then this year, of course, working hand in glove with government in terms of supporting the vaccination rollout program. And what we have found is that many of the features that have been discussed already, those of trust, those of taking brave and courageous decisions, are all hallmarks of the leadership that has had to be demonstrated. And the other point that I'd like to stress at this stage was not one of us have the capabilities on our own, not one constituency. The only way that we can actually address many of these challenges is by leveraging capabilities, skills, and resources across society, wheresoever it lies. And that does require a much higher level of trust, as Mamokgethi has said, than has existed before across a broad spectrum of players in society who are not in any shape, size, or form homogeneous in the way in which they behave, again, as we've started to discuss.
So let's pick up then, if we can, on that issue of trust that all of our panel members have raised. Vukani, let me come back to you. Important points have been made. There is general consensus that there is a trust deficit. How then do leaders manage and start engendering that process to bridge the gap?
I think it's in the narrative, Jeremy. So we have got to create a new narrative in the country that seeks to, not only in politics, because you see the trust deficit is caused by many elements, in our nation today. One of them is corruption. We need to take leadership stand, a stronger leadership stand.
When you say we, who are you talking about?
I'm talking about both government, private sector, civil society. This is not a Pretoria will provide type situation.
Correct.
This is all of us, like Mamokgethi has mentioned, we have got to lead ourselves. We shouldn't be looking for someone else to lead us. We should be saying, hey, as a leader in business, what am I doing that's different? I should refuse to be corrupt as a leader of a business, for example. And I'm also saying that we need to significantly up the level of skills in the country. You know, the reality is you drive around in the township today. I don't know if you drive around in the township, Jeremy, but I do because I'm from there. You see scores of youngsters languishing, you know, in the township who could really have skills that contribute meaningfully in the country if we give them. And that's where trust is going to come from. And then the last one, I think there should be a much stronger collaboration of parties. When I say this, I mean, Martin is already, you know, saying a few things about how government and private sector is working together, but I think we can do a lot more here. Because there's skills that sit across the spectrum of business to actually lead. But unless we harness these skills jointly in a much more collaborative way, it becomes difficult to create a significant value and move the needle. But we've got to bring all these elements together to increase significantly the trust level in the country.
So, Leila Fourie, I'm sure that you would agree about the reframing of the narrative. Let's assume that happens, that you're bringing the parties together. What then, and how specifically do you ignite private sector accelerated participation in all of this?
So, Jeremy, just to add to the point on trust, I think firstly, trust is the basis to accelerate and ignite public-private sector engagement. And trust is the basis of three things. Firstly, delivery. If you promise and don't deliver, you break your bond of trust. And so delivery is crucial. And this requires a willingness by government to accept the support and help from private sector, and the willingness to empower business to get involved. I think of examples specifically such as the vaccination rollout. Business has a vital role to play to ensure that those vaccines are effectively rolled out. The second area is in relation of trust is in relationship building. And I think that business needs to be put on an equal footing to labor in relation to the engagements with government. There needs to be as much engagement and an ear by government for business as there is for labor. And the third area is in consistency and predictability. People who do not experience a predictable and consistent outcome tend to break down in trust. And so while we are consistently building that public-private sector collaboration, I do think more needs to be done to make that more consistent. And I think no better situation than a crisis such as the pandemic and our economic crisis and the psychological crisis that comes with it. So private sector did a lot in the Solidarity Fund in pledging their personal income plus the revenues of their company. And I think that went a long way to start to build the foundation. Business has also done an enormous amount in supporting the vaccine rollout. And I think where we need to go in the medium to long term is for business to get more involved in enabling the delivery and the execution to build that trust in areas like infrastructure, in enabling SME development, in igniting our technology and startup environment within South Africa, because that's where the growth mode and the vector of change will really emanate from.
All right, Leila Fourie, we're going to try and fix your signal as I move on once again to Professor Phakeng, Vice-Chancellor at the University of Cape Town. Professor, what are the points that you raised? And I think this is also critical. I'd like you, first of all, to touch on that trust deficit issue and bridging the gap, because listening to Dr. Leila Fourie, she was using phrases like more willingness from government, more needs to be done. I'm sensing that in order for many people to get their narrative on the table, it's become something of a fight. That's the one issue that I want you to raise on. The other one, and the other avenue I want to open is understanding whom we lead. I'm keen to know how you develop that understanding, because when we have a better understanding of that, then we can start opening up that skills debate. But let's start off, if we can, with with bridging that trust deficit. What are your views?
For me, thanks, Jeremy. For me, I think it's important to develop trust. I mean, I agree with Leila about consistency, predictability, and keeping your word to deliver on what you promise. But I think there's also a different kind of leadership that's needed completely, a different style, ways of working that are needed. I mean, I think we need to be much more humble and much more closer to the people, as scary as it might feel. And I think, or much closer to those we lead, because we lead in different contexts. Without that, the leader is too far removed. And so perceptions about the leader and leadership and why they should not be trusted perpetuate. I mean, and this is the reason why, for me, it's been important to go into students' residences and have dinner with them, so that I can say to them, I agree with you, this food is not up to scratch. Or go and chat to the gardener and the cleaner so that I can understand what their query is. So meet with labor every month and meet with the SRC every 2 weeks with the entire executive. Because at some stage we sit in the meeting, I don't hear the issues on the picket line, and I can say, yes, you are right. So the idea that they have this leadership that only thinks about themselves and not think about those they lead, I'm dealing with that. And that takes time, right? But it takes concerted effort. You've got to focus on doing it. So if a student calls or maybe an attempted drowning in the risk, I want to be there. Even though there are people who are tasked to look at that, there's a good reason I live in the Vice-Chancellor's house, and I can dash there and give support. Even if I can't take anyone out of the swimming pool, it's just being there and asking if they're okay. For me, it brings them closer. If I'm surrounded by bodyguards and I go around with the driver and I leave a flashlight and I go up in front of the queue and whatever, this continues because it perpetuates the idea that leadership endows people with all these fleshy stuff. They don't do much, that's all they do. And then when it comes in terms of understanding whom we lead, I mean, I want to draw on the example that Vukani gave about if you drive in the township, and I agree with him. If you drive in the township, you see people out there and so on. Earlier on, we referred to unemployment. And here's the thing, who is unemployed and who is there just roaming around in the township? Let me tell you, the unemployed, many of the unemployed are dropouts. They are dropouts. They are smart. They can speak. They have learned a whole lot of things. Of course, there's a fraction that's people who didn't even go to university or an FET college. But I don't know. I think there's a good number of people who are unemployed, who are out there, who actually can contribute, or who actually we need for them to help us change the narrative in the townships. And so we need to do something about that group of people. And for us at UCT, this is very important. Not only did we launch the online high school, but I'm working on a big project to actually lure in any student who's been to university. They got some modules, either university or FET college, they passed something, but they dropped out. And we want to reskill them. We want to say there's an opportunity here for them to do something. We don't calling them dropout. What they've had is interrupted studies. And the idea is to get that resource Rather than give them a social grant, we want to give them an opportunity with skills of the future, and then the industry can absorb them, many of them. And of course, we would need to work with the industry, particularly in the IT world and data science, where new skills are needed.
Yeah.
We do all of that. But I think that's a community that we live, because every year, I mean, can you believe that you have a country where you have an organization for unemployed graduates? How much more of those who dropped out? So we need a reskilling, a refocusing of their energy. Otherwise, they get absorbed into, and they're very smart. So the tactics they use keep improving.
We are moving slowly to that space of leadership and skills development because, Professor, you raised some very important points. But Martin Kingston, before we get there, I just want to raise one more issue with you. And I want to come back to this concept of meaningful partnership. In terms of bringing constituencies together from a leadership perspective, what are the mechanics? What is the tone? What is the tenor that you've used in order to bridge what to many would be an insurmountable gap?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, Jeremy, because we are living in not only completely unprecedented times, but also a highly unpredictable set of circumstances going forwards, and we don't know how long it's going to endure. And my own assessment has been that the starting point is not just leading by example, but actually being a good listener. What has become absolutely apparent is that each of us, from our own vantage point, may claim to understand our constituency to a greater or lesser degree. In the case of business, for example, formal and informal, domestic and international, across all the sectors, based in rural areas or based in urban areas. So a huge spectrum of business representation, small, medium-sized and large businesses. But by the same token, for us to claim that we can really understand the challenges that are confronted by civil society or indeed by government is very difficult. And what we found in the context of the social compacting process that has taken place over the past 18 months, particularly under, but not only exclusively under the auspices of NEDLAC, has been the need to engage. And we've been meeting initially literally every day of the week, 7 days a week, to confront these challenges, has been the ability to listen to the challenges that other constituencies face in terms of bringing to bear their not only problems, but also solutions. So, for example, in the context of the vaccination rollout, and I'm emphasizing that because that's the biggest single opportunity we have to change the economic trajectory in the country, and indeed to safeguard people's lives and the healthcare system. We've had to rely upon and leverage all types of constituencies, not only led by government, because government doesn't necessarily speak to Mamokgethi's constituency, or indeed to Leila's constituency or Vukani's constituency, but to gather around us people, whether it be faith-based leaders, whether it be community leaders, whether it be people from organized labor, who have direct line of sight to very large bodies of people who, by the way, need to be vaccinated as quickly as possible. And we know that it's not moving as quickly as it needs to. We're in the third wave. In fact, my concern is that the third wave is going to be overtaken by the fourth wave. We need to get through that as quickly as possible, because the very challenges we've been talking about, which are societal challenges, are only going to be addressed in significant part if we get the economy operating at full pace. So listening is absolutely central to that proposition, Jeremy.
Martin Kingston, a very quick reply to this question, and I don't want to sound too philosophical, but as a leader, how do you listen? What are you listening out for?
Well, I think that you need to understand that your perspective is not the only perspective. You need to understand the processes, the key drivers, and the need to break through. So my own assessment has been, as I said, that their own experience is very different to our experience in business, for example, particularly in organized and sort of institutionalized business. So you listen for the differences. You don't listen for communality. You build on areas of commonality and you try to resolve areas of difference.
So now, Vukani, link listening, because that is critical, when it comes to leadership. And a quick aside here, when I started out in broadcasting many, many years ago, I was told by one of my mentors to talk less and listen more. And it's advice that has stood me in good stead for most of my career. So when it comes to the skills issue now, let's move on to that, because this is very close to your and Accenture's heart. How do leaders then need to start listening and engaging with the skills issue in this country, given there is such a huge disparity?
Yeah, so Jeremy, perhaps to frame this is just to say the world is changing. It's not just here in South Africa, but it's the world over. And COVID has just fast-tracked the change much more. And as a result, we have to be, the listening thing that we have got to do is to understand where the future is going, okay? Is to therefore figure out what we need to skill our people on in order for us to capture the future.
So what are you listening out for?
I'm listening to the trends, for instance. Mamokgethi has spoken about the fact that the future of new skills is sitting in data science and cloud and e-commerce and this thing. And I'm hearing that very clear. So what am I doing? I'm training a new group of skills which is going to focus on this area because it's clear that that's the future, okay? But also the president wrote about a very interesting article on, I think it was the 4th of April, if I'm not mistaken, where he said, if you rank South Africa with eight other nations, South Africa is #1 when it comes to business process outsourcing. Here's the deal, Jeremy. We don't have a jobs issue in the country. We have a skills issue. And what we've got to listen to is, what do our people have that are not working, that are unemployed? What does our nation and other nations across the world need so that we can figure out what to skill our people on?
How do you seed that debate then? You've framed the narrative, you've identified what the problem is, you know what the skills deficit is then. How do you then take it to the next step? Because it seems to me that there's an awful amount of talking expended on this issue, but we're not seeing enough real traction. And I'll put that question to Leila Fourie in just a moment. But what would you like to see?
What I'd like to see is, first of all, a recognition that this is not just a Vukani issue to solve or an Accenture issue to solve. Frankly, this is about us coming together as a collective. So what's happening in the nation right now is that everyone is trying to solve this issue in their own little pocket. And what we're doing is to creating non-scalable little solutions. What we've got to do is to dream bigger. We need to create a much bigger dream. I dream of a nation where we could service the world. India has done it. India is servicing most of the Western countries through the skills that they've built in India. They have collaborated with government to the point that Leila was talking about. They've collaborated with government and created conditions that enable those skills that they've built to sell across the globe. But then they've also built public-private partnerships that enable us to that enable them to create centers, for instance. I dream of the same thing for our country. Imagine a scenario where we have built sufficient skills to service for our own needs here. We've built delivery centers. In fact, I remember I spoke with Prof. Phakeng this to say you could actually use universities to create delivery centers with skills of the future, both in technology field, in outsourcing, and in other areas, and we can service the world. This is how we could significantly change the narrative in the skills development.
There might be an argument, and just a quick answer, that it would be principally government's job to harness and manage those small solutions that you're talking about. You would disagree with that?
I don't think that is only government. I think government has a role for sure, but I think us as private sector community could actually come together. In fact, we are already coming together, to talk about what can we realistically do. So yes, you are right, there is an opportunity for government to harness the pockets that are existing, but we shouldn't wait for government to actually take that stand. We can do it on our own. There is no reason why we cannot come together and group the pieces of work that we're doing and create a much better movement for South Africa.
Leila Fourie from the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, you've been listening to that. I'd like you to comment on that. And secondly, answer this question for me then. Blue Chip South Africa, is it doing enough to apply its mind to the skills issue that Vukani raises?
So, Jeremy, yes, indeed, Vukani raises some very interesting points, and while the COVID crisis has certainly accelerated the urgency of both our skills deficit and our job deficit, we've always been at the mercy of events that are outside of our control. And so what needs to happen in the future to address both the skills deficit and the job deficit is, on the skills deficit, education and follow through in education for the number of people who start in grade or Form 1 and finish in matric needs to be improved. And we need to subsidize and support more strongly those non-academic subjects, electricians, engineers. The stem cell subjects are notoriously weak in South Africa. And so I do think that we have work to do. While a large part of that does fall on the shoulders of government, there are roles that private sector can play. Insofar as job creation goes, and I saw this firsthand with my son, who finished matric and completed his tertiary studies. The role of a job in creating individual self-worth and a positive mentality, and therefore consumption and business and consumer confidence, can't be underestimated. We need to do more in the, as I said, the trades, in building jobs in the trades. We need to do more in translating what is an enormous funding opportunity in the infrastructure space and turning that into jobs, and also in the SME space. Now, a lot of large, big corporates have started building SME accelerators and incubators, and that is certainly going a long way. But I think that needs to come together in a more national effort. The JSE has recently announced that it'll be introducing a private sector, a private placement SME focus, and we're building out an ecosystem. And the idea there is, on a point of national identity, on a point of building our nation, we want to try and crowd in as many corporates. So these are really the areas: is education, skill, job creation in the form of infrastructure projects which actually follow through and don't just become headlines and well-funded ideas, but actually translate into real jobs on the ground.
Leila Fourie, 2 quick responses, please. And I'm looking at a crowded list of questions from people who are watching us today. Skulk de Beer says, you can have all the skills, but if you're not competitive, you're not going to be in business. And Erica Stillerman says, business needs to lead from the front. Is business leading from the front, do you think?
I do think business is leading from the front. I do think business is doing a lot. Of course, more can always be done. But business in the form of B4SA, in our initiatives through BLSA and BUSA, have genuinely made a very material contribution to rebuilding the economy post the pandemic. And I do think that the pandemic has been a wonderful catalyst to create a more meaningful collaboration and a more genuine contribution by big business.
Professor Phakeng, back to you in Cape Town. I would put to you that leadership good leadership is also about inspiration. You talk about the people who have had interrupted studies. We don't refer to them, you say, anymore as dropouts. Having said that, though, you're also talking to a constituency that is despondent. Many South Africans who are not students are also despondent. What does leadership need to do in order to be a little more inspirational, do you think?
I think it's to model what leading yourself looks like. I agree with you that people need inspiration, but I always say inspiration doesn't go alone. We need leaders who are inspirational yet calming, and they have to be visionary yet down to earth and confident in what they know, but also not afraid to say, I don't know. And I have found that the more I say to my colleagues that I don't know, the better things get. Sort of there's a sense of trust. I mean, in many ways, I feel like since I got into the job, all of UCTVC, all one has been doing is to rebuild, recover what we had lost during the protest season, strengthen governance and structures. And I've been going to our faculty, deans, advisory committees, and I say to them, I'm here to talk with you because actually I don't know what to do. And I want you to help me. Senate is not what it should be. And it's amazing how many people come on board to talk and to open up. And they find that what I say during that meeting inspirational. The other thing that I've been doing in the sense, of inspiration. I think living an authentic life. There's something about our young people actually seeing everything as smooth and not actually realizing that I can be truthful with you and you might not like it, but it's in your interest. And actually I do have down days too. So I challenge our students. I am not scared to meet with a group of EFF students or SASCO students. I don't see them as an enemy, or even how when they went to the newspapers and said, I'm anti-transformation, I must leave. I called them and I said, what's up? Tell me what's going on and why are you not coming to me? And actually, I say to them, we can come to the table and agree to disagree, because I'm accountable. So I've got to understand where you're coming from. But I think you cannot do that unless people see you as an authentic human being. And here's the other thing. We are also not so good as leadership with hearing dissenting voices. Leaders generally don't like dissenting voices. So what I've done starting this year is to start VC's conversational series of dissenting voices. So voices that we don't want to hear, but we will definitely hear on the picket line. Some people think it's a crazy idea, and I had thought we'll have 3, and we have now had 4. We are on to the 5th that will focus on vaccinations. And it's interesting because it creates a space. And I deliberately invite someone who will talk about an issue where there are divergent views in the executive, in the leadership, and I invite different groups, leadership groups in the university, to hear dissenting voices. And I don't think we create spaces for those dissenting voices. And here's the thing about a culture of not giving space to dissenting voices, is that you get young people go further. Not only do they not give space to dissenting voices, they think dissenting voices have to be shut down. And so you see in meetings, public meetings, whether they're of a political party or whatever, there's such a fight. People can't just keep quiet and listen to someone who's got a different view from them. But we as a university can build that culture from here. Higher education can build that culture. And I say that to VCs, I'll say that to my team, I'll say that to other colleagues in other universities, whether they believe it or not. If we ourselves as leaders cannot listen to to students who say things that we don't like, who do not agree with us. And even if when it ends, we still don't agree, then we can forget about our society doing that, because we are a place of ideas. So for me, listening to dissenting voices might also contribute to trust, but it also serves as an inspiration of, first of all, we're living with a real human. We are led by a real human being. They are not a super god, right? They're a real human being. There are things that they don't know. And actually, they're willing to hear sides of the story that don't agree with them. They engage, but they give you a space. I think that's needed in our country today. And maybe people will not give us messages through protests. Frankly speaking, most of the things that we change, from 2015 or since the service delivery protest started, most of the issues that are getting listened to is because they come through protests, and we've got to stop that. And we can stop that by having a culture of listening to dissenting voices, having fierce conversations, and having people who facilitate them, who are sort of trusted, are inspirational, and young people and this generation C can listen to.
Right, Martin Kingston, let me throw this one at you very quickly then as we start to come to the end of this conversation, and I am going to come to all of you for some closing remarks, but I'll put up my hand and say I really don't like people who disagree with me. So as a leader, how do you engage with dissenting voices, something within your framework, your structure, I'm sure you're having to deal with very often?
All the time, Jeremy, and Professor Phakeng is absolutely right. In fact, as often as not, those dissenting voices have got contributions to make that are far more powerful than the conventional, or if you like, the majority views. And we have to do that both within business and within our individual structures, as well as across social partners. So we welcome and we encourage it with the proviso that at the end of the day, there's a willingness to take difficult decisions, to prioritize as we have to. And that doesn't just apply with those of us who are from an older generation. It applies equally to the youth. And what I wanted to just comment on was three things very quickly. The first is the need to co-create. We have to co-create. We can't do it on our own. The second is to inspire with hope. But hope is the other side of the coin from trust. Hope is dependent upon being able to demonstrate that there are predictable outcomes that actually materialize. And the third is that the most important asset that we have as a country is, in fact, our human capital. It's nothing else. And if we don't develop our human capital, as we've been discussing, then we're not going to achieve the objectives and indeed our potential as a country. And all of us have got a role to play in ensuring that we can bring dissenting voices along with us, or they indeed can bring us along with them by being open to those types of inputs, particularly in a time of enormous societal strain, as we find and are experiencing currently.
It takes a lot of maturity to engage with and understand those dissenting voices. To Professor Phakeng and to Martin Kingston, I think you raise a very important point. Folks, in our closing few minutes now, I'm going to ask each of you to give us a leadership primer for next year, for 2022. How do you see things panning out? What do leaders need to do? If I come back to the topic of our conversation today, new ways to lead, what do leaders need to do? Where are the risks and where are the opportunities? Vukani, as our host, let's start with you.
Three things, Jeremy, and I think everyone agrees here. Trust is at the center of it. There is not much we're going to do unless people trust us. And the second point is I want to employ everyone who's a leader in this nation to have clarity in their minds about what we should be doing. So we should come together and pull out scenarios, scenario planning. Have scenario A, B, or C, and choose a scenario that we believe is sensible for our nation. And my own point of view is that the scenario that talks to how we enhance our skills and our human ingenuity as a nation and utilize it as a catalyst to create growth for our nation is probably the best. And the last thing is delivery, execution, execution, execution. The trust that we spoke about cannot be earned unless we showcase or we demonstrate that we're doing what we promised.
A lot of honest conversation today. There's been critical conversation. We have exposed gaps where leadership needs to step in. But having said all of that and having outlined those three critical points, going forward as we hopefully start to move into a post-pandemic phase, whether it is next year or the year after, do you feel a little bit more confident? Do you think that we're starting as a nation, public and private sector, to grasp those principles that you refer to?
I always pour from a half full cup. So, yes, honestly, I believe we can do really well as a country. We have all the ingredients that we need to do well as a nation. What do we lack? Or what do we need to do better of? I really think is this question of leadership. We have to take the baton and lead from the front and show the nation what we can do or what we should do to really produce the goods.
Leila Fourie from the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Again, I come to you. Risks, opportunities. What is your primer for 2022?
Well, I'd say I very much agree with what Vukani has just said, Jeremy. Underpinning trust is a mutual ability and willingness to deliver, to execute, and to make good on our promises. I also think that empathy and being connected with the people on the ground and the battles that everybody is facing right now is crucial. I was reading recently about Marcus Aurelius, who led through the Antonine Plague, and he made a very profound point. He said, a disease like this can only threatens our lives, but evil, selfishness, pride, and hypocrisy threaten our humanity. And ultimately, what we are facing into is a humanitarian crisis. People don't have jobs, they can't feed themselves, and they're losing their lives to an unknown and scary pandemic. And so a joint reversion back to our basic values and the empathy that is required to engage with people on the ground and really understand the position that they're in is really crucial.
Those are big points, Leila Fourie, that you've just raised. It also says to me that going forward, the weight of leadership is going to sit more heavily on people's shoulders. You need to be... Professor Phakeng was talking about authenticity, but apart from authenticity, a lot more courage, perhaps.
Absolutely, Jeremy. And for the 18 months, for the 24 months that I've been in office, 18 of those have been managing through a crisis. And I think that all leaders will agree that a situation such as this does call for a different approach to engaging, and courageousness and strength in staying the course is a really crucial factor. But ultimately, it's all about our people. We need to have a heart for the people, and we need to see things through the eyes of our people if we're to build and resonate trust and a sense of belonging and national identity.
Right.
And therefore build confidence in business and consumer confidence in the country.
As Professor Phakeng said a little earlier, it's about understanding who we lead. Professor, with about 3 minutes to go on the broadcast, let me just get some closing thoughts from you in terms of the primer. What would you like to see leadership engaging with next year?
I mean, in closing, I just want to say, the days of a single-minded command and control mentality are gone. We need to move to a more agile form of leadership. And it's going to take a balance, we're going to have to balance command with purpose, nimbleness, adaptability, and collaboration. So leaders in today's context must invariably use their judgment to make critical, tough decisions that others cannot make. I mean, we know that populist leadership is not sustainable. So the paradox of the demands for leaders to be authentic and empathetic and to display their personalities while at the same time playing the role of the bold figurehead that people will follow and admire continues to be, it will continue to be a tension, because, usually people just want to sit with one. We're going to have this, to keep this tension going between the different roles that we play. Jeremy, I would say that's, for me, that's what's going to help us next year. And also realize that, nobody's going to come here to save us. I say to students, we must do it ourselves. We cannot destroy South Africa. We've got to do it ourselves. And so we've got all put our heads together, whether we're universities or not, put our heads together to find solutions to the challenges that we're facing right now.
And
thank you very much.
Martin Kingston, I would say to you, good luck as you try to top that, because that's a big list of very important issues that all our panel members have raised. What are your closing remarks then?
Yeah, I only have two, if I may, Jeremy. The first is, we can only do what we have to do as leaders in partnership with our other cadres and constituencies in South Africa. That's what we've demonstrated in the context of the last 18 months. We need to build on that. I think it's an extraordinary demonstration of social compacting. And the second, and each and every one of us can be a leader here, is we need to encourage everybody to get vaccinated as quickly as possible. It's the only way that we'll return to whatever the new normal is going to look like. That is indeed my plea for the balance of 2021 and 2022.
On behalf of Accenture in Africa and to all our panel members, thank you very much for joining us today. I said at the beginning of this conversation that this is a big and audacious debate. We hope that we have started it to an extent. I would only suggest that there need to be a lot more of these dialogues next year as we try to chart the path forward. So thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.